Tonight, we're going over our least favorite picks from rounds 1 through 3 of the 2025 NFL Draft. Hey guys, I'm your host, Joshua Klein of the Draft Beard Podcast. Thank you guys so much for joining me on this episode of the Draft Beard Podcast, where we're going to go over my least favorite picks from the 2025 NFL Draft rounds 1 through 3. These are going to be players or picks that maybe when you look at what was on the board, a different player probably would have fit better for that team, or maybe I just didn't like the scheme fit, or maybe the combination of picks when you look at as a whole over the first 3 rounds of the NFL Draft. So that's where I kind of get my idea for my least favorite picks of this year's draft. And so before we get to that, though, if you could do me a favor, if you could like, subscribe, and share, I would really appreciate it. It does help get this content out to those who are most interested in all things NFL, NFL Draft, or sports related. And don't forget to hit that notification bell. For those of you who are subscribed, you'll get notified immediately when an episode drops of the Draft Beard Podcast. And if you aren't subscribed, why not? Go ahead, hit that subscribe button. Don't forget like, subscribe, share, and the notification bell as well. So we're going to get into my least favorite picks of the 2025 NFL Draft of the first 3 rounds. And I'm going to get started with the San Francisco 49ers picking Mykel Williams. Not as high on Mykel. I do see some of the upside with him. He's going to come into the league as a really good stout, setting the edge defender. He really is going to need some time to develop to be a pass rusher. I see it there. That is something that you look at and go, the upside is tremendous with him and looking to develop as a pass rusher. I was not as high on Mykel. I had Mykel Williams as my number 7 edge rusher, 2nd round grade on him. But I think that the 49ers could have went a little bit different direction. Again, going with the guy with upside, I really thought that Walter Nolen would just fit like a glove with San Francisco. That was the pick I just thought was going to be a shoe-in pick there. Obviously, without the medical concerns, I might have looked at a guy like Will Johnson. But I think that having a guy like Walter Nolen there at number 12 would have been a little bit better fit than Mykel Williams. And then when you pair it up with what the 49ers did coming back in the 2nd round and picking Alfred Collins. So they did go with edge D tackle. If you compare what was there on the board, if you go with Walter Nolen in the 1st round, who's definitely a much better prospect in terms of upside than an Alfred Collins, you had Nick Scorton sitting there who probably could have fit well with having a bigger guy at the position with upside. You also had Donovan Ezeraku there. So when you look at it as a whole, would you rather have had Mykel Williams and Alfred Collins, or would have you rather had a guy like Walter Nolen, Donovan Ezeraku, Walter Nolen, Scorton, right? So that's kind of where I felt it just wasn't as high on Mykel Williams as a lot of others were. I get it. He was one of those guys. In fact, it was both Georgia guys who you saw a lot of people who had them rated high, maybe in the top 10, top 15, where others had them graded maybe in the back end of the 1st round and maybe into the early 2nd round. So maybe just looking at my viewpoint on Mykel, picking him at 12. But when you look at the combination, I would have rather had the latter on getting the, I think, edge rushers who I either had rated ahead of Mykel or who were really close and could have got them in the 2nd round and got a player who maybe has better long-term upside in Walter Nolen. I just think he might have fit a little bit better. But it did seem like they went with a little bit more beef with Mykel and Collins there than they did going with, say, a Nolen versus Ezeraku, Nolen versus Scorton there. So it looks like that was their philosophy. I just looked at it as the combination there of getting Mykel Williams versus Walter Nolen and then the other guys. I liked that combination better than the ones they got. Even Mykel Williams in himself, even if they didn't do what they did in the 2nd or 3rd round, it still wasn't one of my favorite picks in the 1st round. The other guy, another person in the 1st round or pick in the 1st round I was a little puzzled by and that was Emeka Egbuka to the Bucks. I'm a really big fan of Emeka Egbuka, huge fan. He was my second rated wide receiver, really good floor, but I don't know if this was the best fit for Emeka. You already have Chris Godwin there. You already have Mike Evans. I know he's coming to the end of this career. That Emeka is not a Mike Evans replacement, right? In terms of the style, they're two totally different receivers. Jalen McMillan, who they drafted last year out of Washington, started to come on. And so now you've got 4 receivers there. I just think it's a little bit more of a logjam. I don't think Emeka is going to get the kind of production that he would have on another roster. Again, the Bucks, I thought for sure would be in on a Jihad Campbell, who would have fit absolutely like a glove in what they were trying to do on defense and the high upside. He's a top 10 player on my draft board. So looking at what else was available there, also Jihad Barron was there as well. I think he might have fit. Will Johnson, but again, I understand there was medical concerns which caused him to fall. So I'm not going to really crap on teams too bad for not picking Will Johnson, when I thought that would be a really good fit there as well for Tampa Bay, especially when you look at what they did in the second and third round. They got phenomenal value at corner. So that kind of worked for them, not taking a Barron or a Johnson. But that's a separate discussion. Just looking at picking Emeka Egbuka was really surprising that the Bucks went wide receiver there with the talent that they already have in the room, already just re-signing Chris Godwin. Emeka is kind of like a duplicate there of Chris Godwin. Just didn't like the fit. Love the player. Absolutely love Emeka Egbuka. I think he has the potential to be a really solid starter over his career. Just didn't like the fit there. Next was the Miami Dolphins in the second round, picking Jonas Savaiinaea, the tackle/guard out of the University of Arizona. Now, I think they reached for him. They didn't have a third-round draft pick. I know they have needs in the offensive line, so I can't really fault them for that. I think there were better players available. Additionally, I think there were better players available at different positions, like corner, maybe a Benjamin Morrison, Shavon Ravel. I know he didn't go to the third round. Will Johnson. Like, if you're going to have a first-round talent fall to you and you there, and Will Johnson went just around there, just beyond the Dolphins pick. I think that would have been a much better use of resources than picking Jonas Savaiinaea than not capitalizing on the corner room or the safety room. Now, Nick Emmanwori, they did go just before that. So I think that would have been a really good fit there. But I think they kind of reached to fill a need as opposed to capitalizing on what would have been the best player available. Also would have fit a need there because their safety room is not very good at all. Their corner room is not very good, especially when you consider the rumors out there that Jalen Ramsey is going to get traded. So that pick, I just didn't like it right at the moment that it was made. I was like, ooh. Not that I don't like Savaiinaea, but I think he was more of a guy that I thought would be more of a third round guy, and that there were better players available. Maybe an Antoine Ursary from Minnesota would have been a better pick there. Or if you're going to take a corner or something at a better need there, and then come back in the third round, and go with a Wyatt Milam, go with a Charles Grant, who has tremendous upside. That probably would have been a better play for the Dolphins, in my opinion. The next one is Demetrius Knight Jr. to the Cincinnati Bengals. Not that I don't like Demetrius Knight. He's more of a third-round graded player, older prospect. It's just with other players that were on the board sitting there, right? I wouldn't have put it past Cincinnati to take the flyer on a Mike Green. Sitting there for them, they need an edge rusher right there for the taking. I get the whole issues behind Mike Green, but just behind him, your division foe takes Mike Green. He's just sitting there for you, ready to be taken. Some of the corners that were there on the board as well would have been a much better play for the Cincinnati Bengals. Offensive line, they really do need to protect Joe Burrow. So if you weren't going to go defense, I could have seen offensive line being a really good pick for them. And you had Tate Ratledge sitting there on the board as well. So looking at what was on the board for the Cincinnati Bengals at the time, you had a Nick Scorton sitting there. Benjamin Morrison goes just after Tate Ratledge, who I mentioned, Mike Green, Trey Amos. I think Andrew Makuba, the safety, would have been a much better play than picking a Demetrius Knight who as an older prospect, I don't know if at the linebacker position would he provide as much on-field value as those guys. Now, obviously, I can be proven wrong on that. But then when you pair it up with another guy, another one of my picks that I wasn't a fan of, and that's in the next round, and that's Dylan Fairchild, man, that not taking a Tate Ratledge there in the second round, that really just exacerbates the Demetrius Knight pick there in the second round. I think if you could have taken Tate Ratledge right there in the second round, and then you could have come back in the third round and maybe gotten some value at corner. If they really wanted a linebacker, maybe they could have traded up to get a Demetrius Knight. You never know what other teams are valuing players. So I get it. I just think that looking at what was available on the board for Cincinnati, even getting into the third round, I think I would have rather have taken a corner there and ended up with Wyatt Milam, who went behind them, or taking the offensive guard and then nailing in a different position there in the third round. But I wasn't a fan of either one of those picks at all for the Cincinnati Bengals, just given it was on the board, what their needs were, and teams that picked them right after. So I think if you would have come away with Mike Green and Wyatt Milam, would have been a much better proposition for the Cincinnati Bengals than going with Knight and Fairchild. Fairchild's a project guard. I think I had him as more of a fourth, fifth round type graded player. I'll just pop over to my draft board really quick here. Yeah, I had him as a late fourth round graded player, behind guys like Miles Frazier, behind guys like Marcus Bowe, who I know as a tackle, he was still on the board going into the fourth round, a Jackson Slater, a Caleb Rogers. All those guys were sitting there. So I think they had value that they could have not picked a Demetrius Knight and picked up the Tate Ratledge, or even picked up the Mike Green, who is a number 6-7 player on my draft board. So didn't like those picks for the Bengals. Another one I was a little puzzled by, and that was Savion Williams to the Green Bay Packers. Now, I get it. There is this fascination with the athlete that is Savion Williams. My concern is he really a football player? He's an athlete with some ability to catch the ball that has absolutely no position. He doesn't understand all the wide receiver position and how to run routes. Is he going to be used more as a running back? He's really a gadget player. I had him as graded in the fifth round. I understand that you don't find guys with that type of size, height, with that type of athletic ability, but the Packers, they need wide receiving help. They did a decent job at getting Matthew Golden there in the first round and breaking tendencies. But if you look at the board and who is there, they take Savion Williams there. I think there are better wide receivers on the board than I would rather have than taking a guy who's going to be a gadget player, right? You need some help in that room. And Savion Williams is going to be more of a guy that you're going to have to scheme up than actually having a good traditional wide receiving role for him. And so you still have guys like Jalen Royals out there. He was available going into the fourth round. Nick Nash. Ao Maynard would have been a great pick for the Green Bay Packers there. I know he's still available going into day 3 of the NFL draft. Really good blocker, good size, good height, one of the few X receivers in this draft. So I just didn't like the pick. I'm not as big a fan on the player at that value because of what are you going to do with him, right? He doesn't have a specific role in the NFL. And I haven't seen a lot of teams have great success with that. And you're going to have to develop a plan for him. Just not one of my favorite picks at all, when I think Green Bay really needs more of a traditional wide receiver to help that room out, which has really suffered through injuries or players who just haven't performed very well. And my last guy that I'm going to hit on here that I just wasn't a fan of and a little surprised, and that is the Baltimore Ravens picking Emory Jones, the offensive tackle out of LSU there. I liked, again, it comes down to players that I liked a little bit better. He didn't have that high of a grade on Emory. He's a developmental player. He's he's not very consistent. He's a lunger. He doesn't have very great control. I just think that there were better players on the board if you wanted to go offensive line. Miles Frazier, his teammate, I think would have been a much better pick. Now I know that Baltimore likes to run. They're more of a run-heavy team than a pass team. I get that. So Miles Frazier is more of a really good pass blocking guard there. But I really like guys like Marcus Bowe is sitting there, the tackle / guard. I think that would have been a much better pick. Or maybe taking a play on Jalen Rivers and going with his upside, or Clay Webb out of Jackson State might have been good. If you're looking at offensive tackle, Cameron Williams, Logan Brown. So I just didn't think that the value was there on a player who I had as a back end of the draft graded player. This is kind of inconsistent, going to be more of a developmental player there. So he was not one of my most favorite picks as well. And then the last two guys, I'll just briefly touch on them. And maybe it goes to show that the NFL is trying to value the nickel corner more. And that was Justin Wally from Minnesota to the Colts and Upton Stout to the 49ers. Just kind of briefly touching on them. They were guys who, little short, not like super overly athletic, but had some production in college, who were taken much higher. I had an undrafted free agent grade on Upton Stout. I had a 7th round grade on Justin Wally. Wally didn't have like ridiculous speed. It was okay. I think he ran a 4.4. Upton ran a 4.5. 40, I believe. Just two guys that I think were a little bit reaches that I had rated much lower on the board. But it looks like both of those teams were kind of valuing guys who maybe can play in the nickel. Definitely not going to be outside guys. So those were the guys that were my least favorite picks from the first 2 days of the NFL draft. So thank you guys so much for joining me in this latest episode. It's going to be a lot of fun to break down each team. That's probably what we'll do next over the next few days. We'll break down each team by division as the draft finishes up, as we are ready for day 3 of the NFL draft, days 4 through 7. Going to get a lot of depth pieces. Maybe your team will find some starters, but that concludes today's episode of the Draft Beard podcast, where we went over my least favorite picks from the 2025 NFL draft in rounds 1 through 3. So have a great day. Enjoy day 3 of the NFL draft, and looking forward to recap everyone's draft class as we move on and out of the 2025 NFL draft.
The Draft Beard podcast.